we have a talk coming up here next, and this is with a couple of the really good surveyors in the Bay Area. Rick Whiting and Randy Sharpe. Both Rick and Randy have been surveying for quite a while. I'm going to get them online here in a second, and they will tell you what their history is. They both have really interesting histories. You have to have a lot of background in boating before you can become a surveyor. So they've got a lot of stories. And we're going to talk about a bunch of stuff that these surveyors go through, and what to look for, and what not to look for, and what's a big deal and what isn't a big deal. And I see I have Randy and Rick up. Hey, you guys, how you doing?
Real good.
Good, thank you.
And I assume you can hear us, Wayne?
I can hear you, Randy. Yeah. Yeah. Hold on one sec. I've got something else going on here I got to turn off. Okay. Now I'm good. Hey, Rick, how's it going?
Very well, thank you.
All right. Randy, how you doing?
I'm doing real well.
Good, good, good. So why don't each of you guys, we'll start with Rick, just give us a little background on what you've done in the past and how you became a surveyor.
Sure. Well, let's see. I started mucking around on boats when I was a kid. Probably started sailing when I was 7 years old. I did that over in England. I grew up as a young lad over in England. Came back to I was born in the States. Came back to the States in my teenage years, and got very involved in a kind of a very unique scouting group that primarily, we didn't do too many campfire type things, but we did a lot of sailing in the summer and skiing in the winter. And in that organization, we actually built 3 small penguin dinghy sailboats. So that got me into the beginnings of boat building and working with wood and building wooden boats. And I was just smitten from the beginning, and it just took off for me and never stopped. And I progressed on through the years, in my teenage years, doing a lot of sailboat racing on the East Coast, starting in small boats, dinghies, and then on into lightning class, and then into keel boats. And I had a friend of my father, neither of my parents were boaters, but a good friend of my dad was, and he took me under his wing. And I started doing longer distance races with him on a I think it was about a 36-foot Sparkman Stevens design boat. And that really got me hooked. So throughout my life, I've been involved in boating, whether it's been sailboats or power boats. I started doing deliveries at a young age because I would be the only guy left after the race was over, and they'd say, "Hey, you're going to take the boat back." And so that's how that aspect of it started for me. And I really enjoyed that part of it, just as much as the racing, actually. I had like a real life career working in Southern California in the motion picture industry. I did that for some 30 odd years, which allowed me a lot of free time, chunks of free time between projects where I could go off and go cruising or go on a long distance sailboat race or go pick up somebody's boat and deliver it back home for them. So I kept very active in boats, throughout that career. And as that started to wane, I kind of saw the handwriting on the wall, and I thought I need to find another passion that's going to keep me going for the next 30 or so years. So it was boating, no doubt about it. And I actually worked as a yacht broker for a short while back in the 90s. And
oh no.
And not with very much success, but I sold it. But I had some friends that were surveyors, and I was, at the time, I was a single parent raising a child, trying to sell boats to stay afloat. And these surveyor friends of mine said, "Hey, why don't you join up with us and start surveying?" And I thought, wow, what a great idea. So I just dove in. And so without, a real engineering background per se, I had always kind of had an interest in science, and I was pretty good at math. So I got involved in SAMS, the Society of Accredited Marine Surveyors, and I started out as an apprentice and apprentice under these two surveyors, full-blown surveyors, for about a year, and then got sent off on my own as a SAMS associate, and I did that for I think 4 years, and then finally sat for the full exam to bring you up to be an accredited marine surveyor. And I did that back in, I think 2011 or 2012. And so I've been surveying now for, I think about 16 years, and I love it. Every day is different. Even, some boats that you've surveyed, production boats that you've surveyed 5 or 6 or 10 or 15 of, and you get on this boat and it's totally different. So the challenges are there every day. It's a very people-oriented business because you're dealing with your client and you're dealing with the brokers and people at the boat yards. And in a sense, as the surveyor, you're kind of in the middle of that mix. And so it's pretty enjoyable. And that's my synopsis.
Yeah, so Rick has talked about a few things here that are kind of interesting. One is the amount of effort that goes into becoming a surveyor. You just can't go out and become a surveyor and say, "Hey, here's my business card, I'm a surveyor," unlike a yacht broker. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of work to become a surveyor, and we really respect these guys. So Randy, you've got a colored past.
That's an interesting way to put it.
Yeah. Randy's come up a little bit of a different way, and he's got some interesting background. So Randy, why don't you fill us in?
Sure. So basically, I came at this a little bit different than the way Rick did. My background, again, as a youngster, growing up on the Long Island Sound, I learned how to sail sunfish at a really young age. And the family moved to Florida when I was about 8 and continued boating, both power boats, water skiing, sailing, the whole works. And then I went off to the U.S. Coast Guard Academy and got a degree in naval architecture and marine engineering, and became a Coast Guard officer and was a marine surveyor. They call them marine inspectors of the Coast Guard, doing commercial vessel inspections and accident investigations and that type of thing. And I did that for 20 years, retired from the Coast Guard while I was here in the San Francisco Bay, and thought, gee, I think I'll work for myself instead of some big government corporation or something. Joined SAMS as Rick did, and tested and became an accredited marine surveyor in 2001, and never looked back. I've been here in the Bay Area for now, over 20 years doing surveys, and every boat is different. As Rick was saying, you can do 3 dozen Catalina 30s and every single one of them is different.
Absolutely. And, we really rely on these guys, and especially as a buyer, these guys are going to go through that boat and they're going to tell you every little bit about that boat, what's good about it, what's bad, what needs to be fixed. It's really important. We work with all of the surveyors in the area. Some of them we'd rather not, but the buyer selects the surveyor. We give them a list of our recommended surveyors. Rick and Randy are both on that list because these guys are really fair. They're really good. They're really fair. And one of the most important things, as Rick had been talking about, is that relationship with the buyer. So Randy, you want to talk a little bit with how you work with the buyers?
Sure. The thing that I like to be able to say is, we're going to go through the boat with the buyer. I recommend that the buyer accompany the surveyor, follow me around, looking over my shoulder, asking questions. And by the end of the day, we've gone from bow to stern, and you should know every aspect of that boat, where all the parts are, where the valves are, where the hoses are, and how everything functions. So it's a pretty comprehensive learning experience for a buyer to become very familiar with that boat. And it takes a good part of the day to go through a boat and explain all those things. Now, we can't find everything, but we attempt to show you how everything works. And I always encourage my customers to ask questions. I start off the day with that information, follow me around, listen to what I'm saying, because I take notes on a tape recorder. And my standard comment is, there are only two questions that are off limits. Why did they do that? And what were they thinking? Because we don't know those things. And I'm always amazed on a daily basis doing surveys, some of the things that, well, the guy down the dock told me that was the way to do it, and it works. So it's important to be able to go through and see that the boat, not only do the systems work, but are they installed properly with proper safety systems and standards.
Rick, you want to add to that?
Well, I will ditto that 100%. I really encourage the buyer to be with me, not necessarily glued to my side, but certainly there on the boat as I go through things. I take a lot of photographs with my surveys. So if the buyer for any reason cannot be there, I do try and include almost as many photographs as I can in my report. And I have others available should the need come up to identify certainly issues that come up. I try to identify those both verbally and visually. If the buyer is there with me, as Randy has pointed out, I like to, bring him right there, put his hands on it, show him what the situation is, so that he knows. And if he's, brand new buyer, like many times the case is, someone that's not really had a lot of experience boating. Again, as Randy had pointed out, I like to take him from the bow all the way back to the stern. I usually start in the interior, bow to stern, and then I go on deck, bow to stern. And then when we have the boat out of the water, again, bow to stern. So 3 passes at the boat to point out and identify certainly as much as we possibly can. I will reiterate that there are, we're not, in a sense, we're not gods here. There are things that can escape us. There are areas on boats that we cannot access. And we don't normally take things apart when we're doing a survey. It's not our boat, and it's not the client's boat yet. And many times the seller gets a little bit offended if we start pulling things apart. But we certainly try to get to all the nooks and crannies that we can possibly get to and identify all of the systems, certainly identify any and all faults or discrepancies that we find. That's our job. That's what we're trying to point out. We're not there to tell you necessarily how to fix it. We're there to identify the issue, give it a certain value on a scale of, how bad it is, whether you can be delayed or it needs to be attended to right this minute. We also cover all of the safety requirements for each particular vessel, and those vary, usually according to size of the vessel, but that's very important as well.
So when we have a buyer, we give them a list of our recommended surveyors in the area. We usually have 4 people on the list. These 2 guys are always on our list. And then there's, a few others that we put on the list that are our preferred recommended surveyors. What do you guys think about going on to Google and searching for a surveyor?
I can speak to that a little bit. Basically, there's two organizations in the country that certify or accredit marine surveyors. And the key factor for anybody searching for a surveyor, if you go to Google and you Google marine surveyor, you're probably going to get a link to the Society of Accredited Marine Surveyors, which is the organization that Rick and I are involved with. And you probably will also get a link to the National Association of Marine Surveyors. I encourage anybody that's looking for the surveyor, once they think they found a person, go to those specific websites and make sure that the individual they think they want to hire is an active member of SAMS or NAMS, so that you know that they're basically being reviewed. We can give you a little background on what SAMS and NAMS do. Basically, there's a review process. If somebody, let's say Wayne decided he didn't want to sell boats anymore and he's going to be a marine surveyor. So he would apply to the Society of Accredited Marine Surveyors and say, here's my background, here's my education, my experience. Here's a copy of a sample survey that I have prepared and I would like to join. And that is reviewed by one of the SAMS regional directors and our membership VP. Those two individuals review all their background. They look at references, their education, their experience, and they make a determination as to whether that person is capable of doing marine surveys. And if they think they are, then they join SAMS as a surveyor associate. After being a surveyor associate for 2 to 5 years, they are allowed to sit for the accreditation test. It's a 4-hour test. It's very comprehensive. It involves both some open book parts where you have to be real familiar with Coast Guard regulations. There's an extensive closed book section where you have to be familiar not only with Coast Guard regulations, but marine terminology, the American Boat and Yacht Council and National Fire Protection Association standards. And there's also an essay section on that test where folks have to be able to articulate how they would go about doing something. So you want to make sure that the person that you're hiring is an active member of one of those two organizations, because like I guess like boat brokers, anybody can hang out a shingle and say, yeah, I have an ad in the Yellow Pages and I have a Google website, I'm a surveyor. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're qualified.
Rick?
Yeah, I'm seeing here, somebody just put a question in the chat section asking, what if the boat we find is in a different country without SAMS and NAMS? How do we get a good quality surveyor? Would you guys travel for us? And the answer to that is two-part. Actually, both SAMS and NAMS have members internationally outside of the United States. And if you contacted the national headquarters for either SAMS or NAMS, they might very well be able to direct you to a surveyor within the organization that lives close to where the boat you're looking at resides. And then the second answer is, I speak for myself, but yes, I travel, and I have traveled. I think I've only traveled once outside of the country to perform a survey, but I've certainly traveled around the country to perform various surveys. So that is another option as well. Randy, I don't know. There is one other organization, I think, over in, is it based in Great Britain?
There is, I'm not sure the name of that organization. And one of the other things is, you know, Rick and I have been doing this for a long time. We go to regional meetings. On the West Coast, we go to our international meetings, which are held all over the country. So over the years, we've gotten to know personally Sam's surveyors throughout the country. And for instance, if somebody called me up and said, I got this boat in San Diego that I really want to have you come down and survey, my response to that is, well, I can do that, but I can also give you names of 3 people that I know personally in San Diego that can do a great job. And so we're very willing to refer other members in our organization throughout the country if you're looking for somebody.
Yeah, good. So let me address the website question I asked you. And Rick, you kind of dodged that question, but let me answer that. So the surveyors that are really good don't have time or don't need to put the money into a really flashy website. The surveyors I find that may not be that good, they have extra time. They may build this really nice website. I don't know, I haven't checked your website, Rick or Randy, lately, but they're not flashy. They don't need to be. These guys are so busy that it's hard to get them scheduled anyways. So comments on that?
Yeah, I'll start. I think when we designed our website, I speak for myself and my business partner, Ben Wedlock. We designed it actually with the help of Steve Wedlock, Ben's father, who was my mentor and was the person that got me involved in surveying. We designed it to provide information rather than a lot of flash. And I don't know, I believe that was the right thing to do. I wanted to put enough information out there to make a prospective client comfortable in their choice. And so we wanted to provide them with our credentials. We provide samples of various surveys, both sail and power, and certainly our individual CVs and resumes.
Randy?
And rates and such.
Yeah, mine's the same way. I wrote my own website. I found a company, I think I use web.com. They have a real simple site builder. And if you were to go to my website, it's all basic information. And I also use my own website as my favorite links. So in addition to surveying, I do consulting on various Coast Guard issues with commercial vessels and accidents. And so there's a lot of information that is on government websites in different areas that I use on a regular basis. And instead of having favorites on my web browser, I've put most of those links right in my website. So it's an informational thing. If you looked at mine, it's just a basic resume, and then it has different pages for sample survey, links to different agencies, that type of information. There's no video or flash or anything on mine because I'm not competent to do all that cool stuff.
And you're too busy doing surveys.
Right.
So unlike us, unlike us brokers, where we have to be out there scrambling, and we put a lot of effort into our websites. Surveyors are definitely different. So just be cautious of that. We really encourage you to use our list, call the surveyors and talk to them, get a good relationship with them. They'll talk to you. I mean, what happens when somebody calls you, Rick?
Well, I try to be as informative as I can, and I understand that this is a big event for them. You're plunking down a big chunk of change on something that's going to be usually for recreational enjoyment. Sometimes it's also for a living arrangement or a combination of the two. But in any event, it is a big event in one's life. And I look back on when I have bought various boats throughout my life, it's stressful. And so having a preliminary conversation with a prospective surveyor, I think, is absolutely the way to go, so that you can get a sense of what it's going to be like on that day when you're dealing with that person for the 6 or 7 or so hours that you're going through the boat, and then the report that will follow. So it's about relationships, I think.
Randy?
Yeah, I would agree with that. We're definitely in the service business. We need to be able to provide information to the client. And if you have a discussion with your surveyor, the best thing to do is to relate to them. And I always ask these questions, tell me about the boat. What is it? Where are you going to use it? Have you ever owned boats before? Get that mutual understanding of each other, so that we then know how detailed your questions are going to be while we're going through the boat. And basically that's the relationship that's developed throughout the day of the survey as well. I tell people, if you think I'm talking, way too simple for you, just let me know. I've got it. And if if it's deer in the headlights and you don't understand what I'm saying, tell me that too. Because we definitely, at the end of the day, we want you to know whether or not you want that boat. People often say to me, well, you're going to tell me whether I should buy this boat or not. And I always say to them, no, I'm not. I'm going to tell you the condition of the boat. We're going to go through and you're going to know what it needs, what it's capable of, what systems work and don't work. And then you're going to decide whether that's the right boat for you. I've surveyed boats that were a complete project, and the buyer wanted a complete project. And then I've surveyed boats that were a complete project, and the buyer's like, no, I need something turnkey. I want to just be able to go sailing tomorrow. So you need to have that discussion and relationship with your surveyor, so that they know where you're coming from and what you're going to use the boat for.
And that doesn't end at the end of the survey either, right, Rick?
No, I have follow-up all the time. And, after the survey is done, and even after the buyer has, in many cases, purchased the vessel and he's taken it out numerous times, I'll get phone calls, follow-up phone calls about things that I may have pointed out in my survey, and what do I need to do to make that right? And so I can go back into my files, pull it up. I may not have it in the top of my head. We look at a lot of boats, on any given month. But I keep all my records, and I can go back and review, and then hopefully have an informed conversation with that person that may be helpful.
Randy,
Yeah.
you going to say something there?
Yeah, absolutely. I love it when I get a phone call from somebody that says, you surveyed my boat back in 2016. What did you mean by item 14 on that work specification? Rick and I probably each do 100, 150 boats a year. Our ability to recall that, unless it was just some amazing bad or good thing, is pretty limited. But like Rick, I also keep all those records, and I encourage people, once you get the report, a lot of times you finish the survey at the end of the day, and I have all my pictures and all my notes, and I go back and type a report, and hopefully the person followed me around, and when they read the report, they know what I'm talking about. They go, oh yeah, Randy showed me that. Sometimes it's Greek for some reason. And I encourage people, send me an email, give me a call. Emails are better for me because I can answer emails any time of the day or night. If you call me and I'm in the bilges of a boat, I tend to turn my phone off, so that then I'll call you back that evening or the next day. But we would never get through a boat if we were answering our phone all day. But absolutely, it's important to be able to call your surveyor up and say, okay, I've read the report and I see your item here in your work list. a recommendation of what to do, but what does that really mean? How am I going to go about that? And we're happy to have that discussion with our clients.
Yeah, this goes right back to establishing that relationship with your surveyor before you even start the survey. So it's really critical to talk to your surveyor, get a relationship with them, interact with them, and then after the survey, if you need to call him, he'll respond to you. I just got a question, and let's see. What about a client who wants to use a surveyor for a pre-offer, modified survey to see if they want to make an offer and get into the contract? Do brokers allow this or discourage that? Do the surveyors get inquiries about that option? So the entire time I've been doing this, I don't think anybody's done a pre-offer survey that costs money. You don't know if you can buy the boat. You don't know you can agree to a price. So I've never done one. I always get the question, hey, do you have any surveys I can see? What's my answer, Randy?
That's the property of the person who surveyed the boat for. It's not, and people ask me that. I mean, I did a boat the other day and the deal fell through for whatever reason. And the next buyer called me up and said, can you just change the name on that report and send it to me? And the answer to that is no. The person that I surveyed the boat for paid for that survey and it's their property. I can't share that with another person. Happy to resurvey the boat. I have no idea whether Wayne ran it aground on the way home from that dry dock. The condition of the boat could have changed the next day. So we go back and resurvey the boat for a new client. That being said, the other part of that question, I sometimes have clients that are out of town. Somebody that's in Washington State or somebody that's just not able to get to the boat because of their crazy schedule. And they'll ask me to spend an hour or two doing a preliminary walkthrough. And I just charge my hourly rate to go through and do a preliminary walkthrough. I take a lot of photos. And then we can discuss based on information that I can research on what I think a proper offer might be as compared to what the asking price might be compared to the rest of the comps that are around. So it's not really a survey. It's more of a walkthrough and discussion with a lot of photographs. And then if they want to proceed and they make an offer and it's accepted, sure, I'll do a full survey afterwards for my standard surveying rates. The key for that is you don't want to hire me to do a survey before you've agreed to a price, or you might be spending $600, $700, $800, $900 or more on a survey and never be able to come to an agreed price with the seller. That's a complete waste of the buyer's time and money.
Right. Exactly. Rick, got anything to add to that?
Yeah, well, I would concur with that. And I have had calls over time, people asking me that same question that, can you come and have a look at the boat? I do it if I have time is my answer. And if it's a choice of doing a walkthrough for somebody that has not put an offer in on a boat yet, or going out and performing a survey for a client who has an offer in place and he or she is serious about buying that boat, my choice is going to be the latter rather than the former. But if time permits, I will do take a similar approach to what Randy just said. There's no written report. It's a verbal conversation augmented with photographs. But it's still time consuming. I mean, it's taking up the better part of a day. For me, it's a day that I could be performing a real survey. And it's funny. I mean, even in these times right now, things are busy and people are buying boats.
Yeah, so good question or good segue into the next question. What's your availability? you know, if somebody's signing a contract on a boat today, when can I get Rick? When can I get Randy? Randy?
I'm like usually 2 to 3 weeks out from a scheduling standpoint, but you never know. Sometimes they'll do their sea trial and go, oh my God, this isn't the right boat. And I get a call and somebody cancels. Sometimes they'll do an engine survey and, oh my God, you need, to replace the engine. And then the survey falls through because we don't need to do the general survey. So the schedule remains flexible, but we have to do the survey, which takes basically most or all of a day. And then we also have to prepare a report. So it's important that we be able to get those reports out. I know Wayne would like me to hand him the report at the end of the survey. So
Why not?
But it takes a considerable amount of time to write up all those findings that we've been taking pictures of and talking about all day, so that it's in a comprehensive report for the person buying the report.
Rick?
I'm going to say ditto on that. I'm usually at least a week out, many times a week or 2 out. And so the soonest I can get word of, wanting that survey performed, the better it is for me so that I can get it on the calendar. But as Randy mentioned, I do get cancellations. It happens, I don't want to say often, but with a certain amount of regularity. I mean, an engine survey jinxes the job, or the sea trial, the buyer or his or her partner realize this is not the boat for me, and so we move on. But generally speaking, at least a week in advance, maybe 2.
Yeah. And we as brokers, we coordinate the surveys, the surveyors, the haul outs, the engine surveyors, the rig surveyors, the sea trials. And it's kind of like juggling a bunch of balls and having to fit these guys in. This is probably the first thing we do, is find out their availability, and then the yard's availability, because the yard has to be able to haul the boat out too. And right now, with where we are with COVID, it's a little bit easier. We can get it in pretty quick, but it's really, juggling act. And to expect to sign a contract and then go and get a survey in the next couple of days, that just won't happen. If we can do it next week, that's really good. Usually 2 to 3 weeks out, usually in that range. So that's what you should expect there. So let me ask you guys a question here. Have you ever done a survey?
Wayne.
I'm sorry?
One thing to keep in mind is, and I'm sure you knew this when you're writing the contracts, is you have a deadline on your contract.
Correct.
So you have to take that 2 to 3 weeks into consideration to make sure that your contract doesn't expire for the offer you're making. If you only give yourself a week to do your due diligence on your contract, then you're probably not going to get the surveys you need.
Yeah, typically here at Atomic Tuna and Farallon, we do 21 days for final acceptance. Now with COVID and things are so up in there, we push it out to 28. If we have somebody from out of town that's buying a boat here, or we're buying our buyers buying a boat somewhere else, it could be 28 to 35. But we'd like to get them pushed through as fast as we can. Randy, Rick, have you ever done a survey with no findings?
Never.
No, I don't think I ever have. No. There's always something on a boat. It's a boat.
It's a boat. Absolutely, it's a boat.
So there's a few things
And I think, by the way, that would hold forth for new boats too. Newly commissioned boats that have not seen any time at sea many times may have issues, or something's not installed properly, or some wires are crossed, or who knows what. But I don't think I've ever come across an absolutely perfect boat.
I
Yeah,
agree with that.
Randy, go ahead.
I agree with that 100%. I have surveyed brand new boats for clients who wanted me to do a delivery survey and written a 10 or 20 item work list. So it's not unusual. And people say to me, and Wayne will confirm this, I'm sure, what do you mean 58 items? Gee, you have to keep in mind that, I guess this might be a good way to say, what do we survey to? What are our standards? Well, there's some pretty set rule standards that the Coast Guard has regulations for. There's really no getting around those, you know, flares, life jackets, fire extinguishers, the safety equipment. But there's a whole book of industry standards, which is the American Boat and Yacht Council. And they write a standard for everything. Anything that has to do with a boat, there's a standard for it in their organization. And it's an industry standard that's developed by the industry with input from surveyors, from manufacturers, from the Coast Guard, from boat builders. And they come up with this set of standards of this is the proper way to build a boat. So we're not only looking at, you know, those 5 or 12 things that are Coast Guard regulations. We're looking at, does it comply with today's industry standards? There's a lot of boats that are, you know, let's say they're built 20, 30 years ago. Well, the standards have changed and updated since then. If I had to survey a boat and say, okay, this is a 1974 Catalina 36, what were the ABYC standards in 1974? Oh, I'll survey it to that. And then next week, I do another boat that was built in 89. What were the standards in 89, et cetera? Our brains would explode. So basically, we keep ourselves up to date on the current industry standards. And then when we survey a boat, there's always going to be items that maybe the boat was never built to have that standard, but we're going to recommend, depending upon how much of a safety issue it is, we're going to recommend that you upgrade to the current standards. So there's always going to be a list.
Rick.
Well, I concur with that. I get called on many times to survey older wooden boats that are, you know, 50, 60 plus years old that were around long before ABYC or NFPA even existed. And so there aren't any standards except what the boat builder thought was prudent and right. And in many cases, it was pretty ingenious and well thought out. In other cases, not so. So thinking about that, a lot of times the issues can, in a situation like that, can be in the area of electrical and, you know, the wiring on the boat and the electrical junction boxes, the main panel. But there can also be issues with the plumbing and the, you know, the list goes on. I try to take into consideration the age of the boat, how long it's been around, how many upgrades have been implemented into the boat to bring it closer to current standards, what the safety factors are if we were to let one situation slide according to today's standards as opposed to when the boat was built. So there's some judgment calls there, but we do try to stay pretty close to the ABYC recommendations that are current at the time, because when it comes down to it, it's a matter of safety and, you know, walking away from having surveyed the boat, knowing that with the changes that have been recommended and implemented properly, the people on that boat are going to be safe when they take it out. And that's, you know, a big part of our mission.
Yeah. For those people that have just joined us and are listening to this talk, we have Rick Whiting and Randy Sharpe, and we're talking about surveys and surveyors and what you should know about surveys and surveyors. So let's go back to that. So you got a list of 30 things. And there's a number of things on that list that we see a lot that really, they should be addressed. They're not really big deals, but they absolutely should be addressed, like wing nuts on a battery terminal, right? It's almost inevitable that we'll see that on our survey. No big deal. It's, you know, a couple dollars to fix it or $10 to fix it. But how about some of the other things like blisters? Randy?
Sure. Blisters are an interesting topic. Most of the boats that I've seen over the years that have blisters, it's been a cosmetic issue. I can talk a little bit about, you know, what causes the blister is probably more important to understand the structural integrity of the boat. So fiberglass is a composite material. There's multi-layers of glass or Kevlar or even carbon fibers, and they're all put together in layers with some sort of polymer that's holding them together. Could be epoxy, could be polyester, could be vinyl ester. There's a lot of different types of resins that they've used over the years. And I think boats that are older like as in early 70s and before that, didn't tend to have a lot of blisters because a lot of it, I think, was being done with all hand layup and craftsmen who were laying up the fiberglass. And sometime in the 80s, and I don't know the exact time frame, they invented a really cool tool to help fiberglass companies lay up boats. It was called a chopper gun. And basically, it's a method of feeding fiberglass strands that are cut off as they're fed and sprayed at the same time with resin. And that introduced a lot of miscellaneous stuff into the laminate. Dust that was in the air, moisture that was in the air. It was run by a compressor, so moisture in the air compression system. And whatever that stuff was that went into the laminate, some of it was water soluble. People say, well, it's fiberglass. It's not water soluble. Well, actually, fiberglass is. Fiberglass soaks up about 3% or so water. So I mean, you'll never see an America's Cup boat that's not dry sailed because they don't want that fiberglass boat to soak up any water sitting in the water between races. Same with some of the really high-end fancy racing yachts. So knowing that that fiberglass is soaking up water, you have to look at that laminate and realize that some of the stuff that's in that laminate, the dust particles, some uncatalyzed resin that wasn't mixed completely, sweat from the guy who was laying it up, whatever, dissolves. And when that happens, the dissolved solution is a very acidic solution. Well, nature doesn't like a nice neutral ocean on the outside of the hull and this little acidic pocket of liquid inside the laminate. So it tends to draw in seawater into that pocket to try and make them the same salinity. Well, it can't do that, and it needs space to do it more. So what happens is the laminate actually separates at that little pocket where it's weakest. The weakest part of a fiberglass laminate is in the gel coat. Well, the gel coat is just sprayed onto the mold to make the boat look pretty. There's nothing to do with structure. The next most common place that you find it is in what they call the skin coat. They put on a very thin layer of fiberglass cloth right after the gel coat so that there's no print through and you can't see the weave of the rest of the laminate. So the most common places that you see blisters are at those weak external two layers of gel coat and skin coat, where in trying to equalize the solution, it makes a little pocket that pops out. On an older boat, you could spend twice what the boat cost you to buy to try and peel the whole hull and repair blisters. And 5 to 10 years later, you're going to have more blisters. It's very rare in my experience that blisters are structural. They tend to just be in the gel coat or skin coat, which are not considered in the structure of the vessel when the designer is coming up with the thicknesses. So for the most part, they're ugly. They're going to slow the boat down. So if you want to race with you know, the big boys and Dennis Conner and those guys, that dates me a little, I guess. You have to realize that you're always going to have a little bit of a foul bottom, but it's not a structural issue. I generally tell people, go around with a scratch awl, make a little tiny pinprick in the blisters, and be happy.
Rick?
Yeah, I'm gonna kind of ditto that again. I remember before I became a surveyor, and actually way back in the 80s and 90s, and in my involvement with boats, I would see boats on the hard with their bottom peeled, and people would go to great expense. They had these machines that would go in and peel the gel coat and that initial coat off, revealing the matte and roving layup. And you would, and the thought at the time was the boat would have to sit out on the hard with its bottom peeled in the hot sun to dry out for 3 to 6 months. And then it would be epoxy barrier coated and then re-gel coated. And this was a huge expense. We're talking thousands of dollars. And I remember talking to surveyors at the time, and their feeling was, it's a pox, you know, we have to deal with these blisters, because if it wasn't already a structural issue, it could very well become one very quickly. And I think over time, we've come to terms with this, and we realize that 9 times out of 10, a blister situation on a boat, let's say that's built between 1975 and now, is usually a cosmetic issue. Even I've seen, you know, boats that have had 4 or 5, you know, like baseball sized blisters. Well, I would recommend that those be treated and be, you know, dug out, taken all the bad out, and then epoxy coated in, and then and faired and recoated with bottom paint. Sometimes I'll see a pox of tiny little fingernail blisters, most of which haven't even popped. Many of them are actually hard in nature. And my thought there is to just paint over them. Monitor them over time for size and growth, but essentially paint over it and move on to the next issue.
And if you think about that cause of the blister, which is that acidic solution, if you ever puncture a blister, don't get it in your eyes.
No.
It's a very acidic solution, and the reason the blister is developing is nature. That's osmotic pressure trying to neutralize the acidic solution in the blister with the ocean. So if you put a tiny little pinprick in the center of that blister, that's going to allow the solution over time to basically rinse out, and the acidic solution will be gone and the blister will not grow. So it's totally a cosmetic issue in those cases. Very rarely you see where larger and larger blisters, 4, 5, 6 inches in diameter, because that acidic solution has been allowed to sit for a long time, it has started to dissolve some of the resin down into the laminate. And I would agree that, yeah, those larger ones, you should grind them out and fix them. But it's a matter of getting all of that acidic solution out of the laminate in that location before you fix it. But peeling boats, yeah, I remember peeling boats. Now it's just, you might as well throw the boat out and get another one, as far as an expense goes in some cases.
Yeah, it's tens of thousands of dollars.
Yeah, the final issue is they figured it out. So the manufacturers were getting all kinds of grief on blisters. The folks making the resin said, well, you know, we have this other kind of resin. It's called vinyl ester resin, and it's way more tenacious and it's a better barrier. Most manufacturers today are building their external layers, those external layers that normally blister, with a vinyl ester resin, so that the water can't get through into the laminate and cause those little moisture pockets to start blisters. And so pretty much anything built after 2000 or so, I rarely see any blisters on.
Another thing that aids in that process is not only the choice of resin, the vinyl ester resin, which it was a huge breakthrough, but the process of vacuum bagging the laminates to absolutely dispel any voids that might be encapsulated in that laminate. And it's a process of they actually put a bag over the laminate that they're creating, and then powerfully suck all of the air and oxygen out of it, and it compresses and tightens up this laminate to technically eliminate any voids that might be occurring. That would be areas that would allow the process of osmotic blistering to occur.
And you guys have seen some blisters.
Oh yeah.
And one of the interesting things is, people might be familiar with the Valiant and the Uniflights of the late 70s, early 80s, and their big advertisement at the time was, we're building military river patrol boats out of this amazing fire retardant resin. And so we're building our yachts out of the same mil-spec fire retardant resin. Well, it turned out that the bromides that they were putting in the fire retardant resin to make it fire retardant were extremely water absorbent. And we had blisters the size of dinner plates going right up the top sides, not just on the hull bottom below the waterline, but everywhere. I've surveyed some of the old Valiants, and it looked like the entire boat had chicken pox, even the cabin top. And
yeah, superstructure, the cabin top, the whole boat.
And the owner's like, yeah, I'm known all over the Pacific as the chicken pox boat, but who cares? I'm having fun. So, and it wasn't a structural issue, but it was unsightly.
Yeah. I see you guys walking around with a little like rectangular device that you put up to the boat on the outside. What is it? And what does it mean when the needle goes, wah?
Well, that would be a moisture meter.
That would be a moisture meter.
One of the tools in our kit that we do tend to use quite a bit. It helps in assessing moisture content in a hull or in a deck or in the cabin sides or the superstructure. You can use it all over the boat. And I use my moisture meter in conjunction with my hammer and percussion testing as a combination to pinpoint and find areas where moisture may be. And then with the help of the moisture meter, I can more clearly identify the parameters of the area that's been damaged or that's been affected by moisture.
Hey, Randy, I'm not going to ask you on that one because I know that it would probably take an hour to answer. And we got a couple other questions. We only have a few more minutes. So let's get to the questions. One question here, keel bolts. If there's indication of corrosion, galvanic or otherwise, what options are there for further investigation to determine structural issues with the keel attachment to the hull? When do you recommend pulling keel bolts for inspection? Randy, it's your turn.
That's a loaded question for sure. There's nothing good about a wet bilge, so you'd always want to keep your bilge dry if you can. The first line of defense is to chip away any surface corrosion, wire brush it, see if you can still see the thread pattern on those keel bolts. If you can, preserve them, be happy. The other side of the issue is they're so corroded that the bolts themselves are mostly missing. And when we haul the boat out of the water, there's a visible gap, or when you push your foot against the side of the keel, it moves. And at that point, you need to get together with the boatyard and they drop the keel and either replace the bolts or possibly, if there's enough meat there, put in new ones staggered from where the old bolts were. But that's a major undertaking to replace keel bolts.
Rick, you got anything to add to that?
Just that there are a couple of different versions of keel boats too, and some that are what are called J hooks, and the bottom section of the rod does a J turn, and it hooks into the actual foam element down in the keel, or the the lead element. So extracting a J bolt, keel bolt, can be a real task. Other keel bolts are threaded and straight threaded down into the lead or iron part of the keel, and those, if they're not too far gone, can be extracted by essentially unscrewing them and bringing them out. But in any event, either of those situations can add up and be quite costly. So I am a big proponent of dry bilges.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Next question, and our last one, and then we're going to rotate over to Peter and Marge again. Do boat manufacturers supply SAMs or NAMs with construction system as builds? Any hopes of finding out plans? For example, how to learn about wiring schematic of a 1999 Albin, only 33 were built. Randy?
Good luck. The best source of that type of information is owners associations. Many of those builders from 20 or 30 years ago are no longer. The chances of you finding plans from the manufacturer are pretty slim, but owners associations tend to be really good. Some people in those associations are pack rats. They've kept the original manuals, and you may be able to get information from that. The other problem is boats, unlike houses, get rewired and things are added and changed all the time. And so the chances of your original wiring from a 20 or 30-year-old boat still being what the manufacturer installed are pretty slim.
Yeah, Rick, I'm sure you agree with all of that. We are out of time, so you guys are great. I hope our audience learned a lot. We're going to have to do this with you guys more often, and the questions we're getting are great, and we really appreciate it. Parting words, Rick?
Thanks for having me, and always think about having a surveyor before you plunk down the money on the boat.
Absolutely. Randy?
I agree with that. Again, thanks for having me on, but I hate it when I get a customer that calls and says, I bought a boat last week and now I need a survey. My insurance company told me I needed one, or the dock manager said I needed one to be in this marina. Yeah.
There you go. So thanks, Randy. Thanks, Rick, and hopefully get you guys back on. So we are going to pivot over to Peter and Margie. That they've been having a little bit of FaceTime here today, and this is their fourth day doing the nautical trivia quiz. So hang out, do the quiz with these guys. It's a lot of fun. You'll learn a lot. Peter, Margie, way you go.